So this is part two of the noun review, and in part one, we talked about the different ways that nouns are used, both in English and in Latin. And we talked about the difference. One big difference between English and Latin is that in English, the noun does not change spelling depending on how it's used in a sentence, whereas in Latin it does. Now these uses of nouns, the way that the nouns are spelled depending upon their use, in Latin we call case, and that's really just a shorthand way of identifying it. You know, imagine if I said, what is the way the noun is spelled when it's the subject of the sentence versus what's the nominative? It's a lot easier just to say, hey, what's the nominative form of this noun? In other words, what's it spelling when it's used as the subject of a sentence? We focus mostly on nominatives and accusatives, and of course nominatives can have various endings, but one thing you noticed is that all the accusatives that we looked at so far, they all ended with the letter M. So, this slide here is just sort of recapping what I just said, essentially. So there it is, in case you need to reference it. And accusatives, as we said, all end in the letter M. Now, what we want to talk about today is answering this question here. Can you detect any patterns between nominative endings and accusative endings? So, let's take a look at some Latin sentences. These come from stage 2, and we looked at some of them last time. We're going to start where it says metella. And I just want you to focus on the nouns to see if you can figure out any patterns in the way that the nouns change from nominative to accusative. So check out this one. Cocuus est in culina. So the cook is in the kitchen. Metella culinam entrat. Metella enters the kitchen. So there we go. Grumio laborat. Grumio is working. Metella grumionem spectat. Oh, Metella is watching Grumio with a knife and a fish. Look at that look on her face. Yeah, he looks worried. Weird. And then, kibus esperatus. The food is prepared. Now, we have kibus here, and then in the next sentence, Metella kibum gustat. So it changed from kibus to kibum, being used here as the accusative, direct object. Metella tastes the food. Grumio est anxius. Metella grumionem laudat. So grumio, subject, versus grumionem, ends in an M there, direct object. Metella praises Grumio. Moving on, amicus est in horto. The friend is in the garden. Look, we have amicus here versus Metella versus Grumio. Think about that. Metella amicum vocat. Metella calls the friend. Okay, so let's think about what are some nouns that you remember from last year in Latin 1. And obviously think about the sentences that we just translated. So we can say words like Metella. And who else do we see? We saw Grumio. What other nouns did we see there? I think we saw amicus. And think about just some basic words that you learned last year. What's the word for dog? Canis, canine being a derivative. Okay, what's the word for son? That would be filius, like filial and affiliate. How about the word for woman? Femina. How about girl? Puella. Think about some other names like Quentus and Caecilius. And then what about other proper nouns or names that you learn? What about merchant? That was mercator. And Clemens. And what about thief? Fur, F-U-R. That was one of the words. How about slave? Servus. Oh boy. And then slave girl was Angela. Okay, so you're probably seeing a pattern here. Let's just do a few more. What about rooms of the house? There was the kitchen, kulina, and then atrium, kubiku, meaning bedroom, triclinium, the dining room, tablinum, meaning the study, right? So I think we've got enough. You can see here, and I'm giving you, these are all the nominative forms, but you can see based on the nominative forms that some groupings emerge here. There's a lot of commonalities because all of these words over here end in the letter A. And all of these end in the letters US. In our third column, we don't really see any kind of discernible pattern whatsoever. I just thought of another one that we could add in the third. What's the Latin word for lion? Think about astrological signs. It is Leo. Right? There we go. And then we have this this other grouping here. They all end in the same two letters, but instead it's UN. Well, okay. Nouns in Latin, we can classify them, just to make things a little bit easier on us, into sort of like categories here. The first category of nouns would be these nouns that end in A in the nominative. And the second category over here would be the ones that end in US in the nominative. And finally, this third category are the ones that don't really seem to have any kind of discernible common ending in the nominative singular. Okay, so what are these noun families called? You might remember this from last year. They are called declensions. So what's a declension? It's a family of nouns where all the nouns in that family have the same endings. Latin has 5 declensions, but for right now we're only going to focus on the first declension, meaning the first group, the second declension, and the third. Now, we have these weird nouns over here that end in um. Those actually belong to the second declension as well, but for right now, I'm going to put second declension neuter, and that might sound kind of bizarre, but let's go back to the grammar notes, and I think that this will be a little bit easier. So as we said, all nouns belong to families called declensions, and Latin has 5 noun declensions, but really until the end of this semester, we're just going to focus on the first 3. And at the very end of the semester, we'll talk about the 4th and 5th declensions. But the vast majority of nouns, something like 85%, belong to the first 3 declensions. So let's talk about the first declension. As you can see, based on our examples here that we just did, all first declension nouns end in the letter A in the nominative singular. In other words, that's the way they're spelled when they're the subject. And then when they're the direct object, in other words, when they're in the accusative case, they end in am. And here are some examples. Metella versus metellam. Wea versus weam. Yanua versus yanuam. And then almost all, with just a handful of exceptions, almost all first declension nouns are feminine in gender. Okay, so all nouns in Latin have a gender, and they're either feminine, masculine, or something called neuter. That's kind of hard for us to conceptualize because English doesn't really have genders. So here you have it. Easy way to remember. Almost all of these first declension nouns, they're all feminine. Moving on to the second declension. Second declension nouns can end in either us or um in the nominative singular. As we saw here, we've got these us nouns, but also these um nouns. But the one thing that they all have in common is that they all end in um in the accusative singular. So we have caecilius as the subject, caecilium as the direct object, dominus, dominum, and then atrium, that was in our category over here, atrium, and atrium. So it's spelled exactly the same way between the nominative and the accusative. So there are some words, there aren't that many, that will be spelled the same way. So then how can you tell if you're reading a Latin sentence if atrium is the subject versus the direct object? Well, two ways. One is context, like does it make sense in the sentence for atrium to be a subject or a direct object? And the second way is look at word placement. So if it's the first word of the sentence, like 99 times out of 100, it's going to be the subject. If atrium is kind of floating toward the end of the sentence, 99 times out of 100, it's going to be the direct object. So in terms of gender, those second declension nouns that end in us in the nominative are masculine. And the way you can remember that is look at the characters in your stories, right? Quentus, caecilius, okay? They are men, so they are nominative. And then the second declension nouns that end in in the nominative are neuter. And we'll talk more about neuter nouns and what that means when we get to stage 18 at the very end of this semester. And then finally, the third declension, the junk pile. As we mentioned, there is no common ending for the nominative singular. So leo, for example, versus navis, versus mercator, versus pater, versus canis. But they all end in em in the accusative singular. So as you can see here, these the second word would be the accusative word. In other words, the way the noun is spelled when it's the direct object of the sentence. So, looking at these words, I want you to tell me or think about what would the case, meaning nominative versus accusative, and also the declension, meaning first, second, or third. Let's look at tabernam. Ends in an am. That's going to be accusative case and first declension. What about dominus? Ends in a us. That would be nominative case, second declension. How about navis? Ends in an is. It's going to be nominative case, third declension. Poeta, nominative case, first declension. Pictorium ends in an em, that's accusative, third. Servum. Now, if we look over here, I think I told you that the nominative form is servus. So servum is a second declension noun, and it's got to be in the accusative case, since servus would be the spelling of it if it were the subject of the sentence. Whelam ends in an am, that's accusative case, first declension. Senex, meaning old man. Notice how it just has some random ending here. That's going to be a nominative noun in the third declension. And then finally, venum. And I'll go ahead and tell you that venum is one of these nouns here, second neuter. So venum can be either nominative or accusative, but it's in the second declension. Here's a little table that I made for you, just to show you. Now these are only the singular endings, the nominative singular endings for first, second, and third declension nouns, and the accusative singular endings for first, second, and third declension nouns. So that's there if you need it. But I'm a big believer in songs, and actually before we do that, the substitute gave you a piece of paper today in class, and that piece of paper is the single most important piece of paper that you will ever receive in my class. It has a noun chart on one side and a verb chart on the other. Keep it in the front of your notebook at all times. Now that we see what the endings are, what I want you to do is go ahead. I've already filled this in for you. Sorry, it's in kind of small text there, but you can make it out. I want you to go ahead and start filling in your noun chart. So running across the top, these numbers indicate the declension numbers. Along the sides, these indicate the noun cases. In other words, what noun endings will they have depending on their use in the sentence. This top chart is for singulars, bottom chart for plurals, and at the very bottom, in case you forget, for example, what the genitive case does, we'll take a look at it. It indicates possession. All right? So, although the notes I just showed you really only cover the singulars, I went ahead and gave you the plural forms as well. So first declension, here are the first declension nominative and accusative singular endings, a and am, a and am. And then nominative plural, you have ae, and that's pronounced I know it's kind of confusing, ae. And then accusative would be as, as. Second declension masculine. Remember, first declension nouns are feminine. Second declension nouns that end in us in the nominative are masculine. It's going to end in in the accusative singular. In the nominative plural, it's the letter I, but that's pronounced, if you remember from the pronunciation video, the letter I with the long mark over it is pronounced E. And then the accusative would be os, os. For second declension neuter nouns, just worry about what they look like in the singular for now, and they both end in That's not too difficult. And then finally, third declension, I drew this little thing here to indicate that there is really no set pattern for nominative singular, but everywhere else there is. Accusative singular ends in em, nominative plural is es, and accusative plural is also es. So once again, if you had the word patres, meaning fathers, how would you know that that's the subject versus direct object? Well, you could tell by context, and you can also tell by placement in the sentence. So, I'm a big believer in songs. I like to sing songs to help you understand and remember your endings. So, we have the nominative song, which some of you might have learned last year. I think Miss Richardson recorded me singing it and put it on YouTube somewhere. So this goes to the tune of "You Are My Sunshine." And this is the way it goes. All the songs will tell you. They're all done by case, for nouns anyway, and they always tell you the name of the case, what they're used for, and then the way the endings go always will be first, second, third declension, singular, followed by first, second, third declension, plural. So this one goes, you are my subject, my only subject, your nominative, you run the verb, you may be AUS or something random, plural A, E, I, or ES. So, there it is. You are my subject, my only subject. Your nominative, you run the verb. You may be AUS or something random, plural A, E, I, or ES. And it helps if you kind of hold up a finger like 1, 2, and 3. So you may be A, hold up the number 1, US, hold up 2, or something random, hold up 3. That way, come quiz time or test time, you can kind of go through the song in your head and figure out, oh yeah, that's second declension, nominative, singular. So, there it is. Practice, practice, practice singing that song. When I return, we're going to sing these quite a bit. And then the accusative case song, which, oh, there we go. It goes to the tune of the wheels on the bus. And once again, name of the case is accusative. That's in the song. you've got what it's used for, direct object, and then you have the first, second, and third declension singular. That's em, and then first, second, third plural, as, os, ace. And I'm just going to sing this once because I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and then you guys can just rewind and practice. So it's the accusative case goes em, em. The accusative case goes em. It's the direct object. The accusative plural goes as, os, ace, as, os, ace, as, os, ace. The accusative plural goes as, os, ace. It's the direct object. And before I go on, I do want to say, and I think Miss Richardson had put this on posted this somewhere on YouTube. I cannot take credit for these songs, for these two songs. They were written by a teacher named Scott Stevens over in Cobb County. Now, some of the songs that we'll be singing in some of the next videos are songs that I came up with, but I just want to give credit where credit is due. So thank you, Mr. Stevens, for writing those lovely songs. So there you have it. I think next time, as we start to review the dative case, I'll probably also throw in a couple of slides that show you some sentences where the nominative plural is used, as well as the accusative plural. You at least have the endings, and we'll just sort of take a look really quickly at the beginning of the dative notes on nominative and accusative plurals in actual Latin sentences. Okay, bye for now.